What if Ferrari has just discovered too late that the problem was never Mercedes, but Lewis Hamilton? Because what happened in Japan was not a simple bad race. It was confirmation of something much deeper. While Charles Leclerc squeezed the car to the podium, Hamilton was stuck, without rhythm, without confidence. Exactly the same as in his previous worst stage. And the most disturbing thing of all is this: Nico Rosberg had already warned about it. Are we seeing the same story repeat itself within Ferrari? Is Hamilton having a problem that not even the change of team has been able to solve? And what does this mean for the future of the Cavallino, just when it seemed like everything was going to start working? Stay, because what has come to light after Japan completely changes the narrative and leaves Ferrari facing a much bigger problem than they imagined. The Japanese Grand Prix was not only another race on the calendar, it was the exact point where all the doubts began to take shape within Ferrari, because until that moment the narrative was clear. The project with Lewis Hamilton was on the rise, there were positive signs, even glimpses of that dominant driver that we all know. But Suzuka completely broke that illusion and did it in a way that fits too well with what Nico Rosberg had been warning about for some time. To understand the real dimension of the problem, you have to go beyond the final result, because a sixth place in itself says nothing in Formula One if you do not analyze the context. And here the context changes absolutely everything. Hamilton did not advance, he did not progress, he did not find rhythm at any time during the weekend, and the most worrying thing is that there was no phase of the race where he seemed to have real control over the car, something that directly contrasts with what was happening on the other side of the garage, where Charles Leclerc did manage to interpret the behavior of the car until it took it to the podium. This generates a first key rift within the team, because when two drivers have the same car but such different results, the analysis stops focusing solely on the performance of the car and begins to point directly to the driver's adaptation. And this is where the most important concept of this entire act appears: trust. Hamilton said it clearly over the weekend, he had no confidence in the car. And this phrase, which may seem simple, is actually devastating at a competitive level, because in circuits like Suzuka, where each corner requires total commitment, any doubt automatically translates into loss of time. It's not just that you go slower, it's that you never reach the car's true limit, and that leaves you completely out of the fight. But the truly disturbing thing is that this feeling is not new. In fact, it is exactly the same pattern that was seen during the previous season, where Hamilton had enormous difficulties finding consistency, especially in qualifying, constantly being overtaken and failing to achieve that connection point that would allow him to exploit the car to the fullest. And this is where Rosberg's analysis takes on brutal value, because he was not talking about a specific problem, he was talking about a phase, a trend, something that could last over time regardless of the team. His warning was very specific. If this lack of connection with the car was not circumstantial, then it could be repeated at Ferrari. Japan is the first real evidence that such a scenario is not only possible, but is already beginning to manifest. In addition, there is a technical detail that further aggravates the situation and explains why Suzuka has been the perfect setting to expose this problem. This circuit requires an extremely fine balance between the front and rear of the car, especially in the first sector, where you need an immediate response from the front axle without losing stability at the rear. If the car does not convey confidence in that area, the driver automatically lifts his foot, and that was exactly what happened to Hamilton. Meanwhile, Leclerc was able to adapt to those conditions, which leaves an uncomfortable conclusion for Ferrari. The car has performance, but it is not accessible to both drivers in the same way. And that is a structural problem, because it forces the team to make an implicit decision: develop the car towards a more adaptable profile or towards the driver who is already extracting performance. This is the point where the pressure begins to grow internally, because Ferrari did not sign Hamilton so that he was learning to understand the car in the third race. They signed him to lead the project, to make a difference in key moments, and right now the situation is the opposite. He is the one who is trying to adapt, while his partner is already in the maximization phase. And all this leads us to an inevitable question that defines the closing of this act. If the problem that Rosberg anticipated is reappearing, can Ferrari really solve it? Or has it just inherited a much deeper conflict than it imagined? Because here we are no longer talking just about sensations or statements, we are talking about behavior on the track, about how a driver interacts with the car in real pressure conditions, and what we saw in Japan fits perfectly with a very specific profile, that of a driver who has lost the exact reference of the limit. Hamilton is no longer failing by excess, he is failing by default. And this is much more serious. When a driver doesn't trust the car, he starts building laps from safety, not from the limit. This means that it brakes a few tenths earlier, that it does not fully load the front axle at corner entry, that it waits a fraction of a second longer before applying the accelerator. All this, accumulated on a circuit like Suzuka, generates a brutal loss of time, but the most important thing is that it completely breaks the driving flow. And this is where the real core of the problem that Rosberg pointed out appears. Hamilton needs a car that gives him a very specific response in the front axle to build his confidence. When that response isn't clear or consistent, your driving style progressively breaks down. This already happened in its previous stage, where the car did not offer that stability at corner entry, and now Ferrari finds itself with a very similar scenario. The SF26, especially on a technical circuit like Suzuka, showed nervous behavior, difficult to predict in high-speed areas, and that is exactly what penalizes the most a driver who depends so much on the precision of the car's initial support. The most worrying thing is that this type of problem is not corrected simply with setup adjustments. You can improve the balance, you can work on the aerodynamics, you can try to soften certain reactions of the car, but if the base of the car has a narrow operating window, the driver will always be on the edge of that uncertainty. And this is where Ferrari enters an extremely delicate area, because it has two completely opposite realities within the same garage. On the one hand, Charles Leclerc is already completely in sync with the car. He understands his limits, knows where he can take risks and where he cannot, and is capable of extracting performance even when the car is not perfect. On the other hand, Hamilton is in an interpretation phase, still trying to figure out how the car will react in each critical situation. This generates a very serious internal technical conflict, because the development of the car now has an implicit direction: continue evolving towards Leclerc's style or try to adapt the car to regain Hamilton's trust. And this is where the analysis becomes even deeper, because historically Ferrari has not been a team that builds neutral cars, but rather cars with a very strong identity. If the SF26 is more aligned with Leclerc's style, any attempt to modify it for Hamilton could compromise overall performance. This puts Hamilton in an extremely vulnerable position within the project. Because if the team decides to prioritize immediate performance, development will follow the path that is already working, and that means Hamilton will have to adapt to a car that does not convey confidence. And if you don't succeed, the problem will not only persist, but will get worse race after race. And this is where Rosberg's warning takes its most dangerous form. He was not talking about a specific drop in performance, he was talking about a prolonged phase where the driver begins to constantly question his connection with the car. And when that process sets in, every weekend becomes a mental struggle as well as a technical one. Japan was not the problem, it was the confirmation. Because Hamilton was not only slower, but he recognized sensations that he had already experienced before. And when a driver of his caliber begins to identify negative patterns in his own driving, the problem stops being external and begins to become internal. This is the exact point where Ferrari loses total control of the situation. Because you can develop a car, you can adjust strategies, you can optimize every technical detail. But rebuilding a driver's confidence at this level is one of the most complex challenges that exist in Formula One. And right now, everything indicates that Ferrari not only has a performance problem, it has an identity problem within its own project. And this is where everything becomes really critical for Ferrari, because if the previous act made it clear to us that the problem exists and that it is also structural, this third act takes us to the most dangerous consequence of all. Time begins to play against us, and each race can further consolidate this situation. Ferrari arrived at 2026 with a very clear bet: to build a winning project around Lewis Hamilton, taking advantage of his experience, his ability to develop the car, and his competitive mentality in a new technical era. But what Japan has revealed is that that plan has a crack that no one within the team can ignore. Because when a driver enters into this dynamic of lack of confidence, it is not something that disappears from one race to the next. On the contrary, it tends to be reinforced. Every corner in which you hesitate, every classification in which you can't find the limit, every direct comparison with your teammate, everything builds a cumulative pressure that ends up affecting not only performance but decision-making within the car. And this is exactly what Nico Rosberg anticipated as the worst possible scenario. Not a slow Hamilton, but a Hamilton trapped in a loop where he cannot reconnect with the car. From here, Ferrari faces a dilemma that can define its entire season, and even its future in the medium term. Because they have two paths and both involve enormous risks. The first is to try to adapt the car to Hamilton. This means modifying the behavior of the car to give it that confidence in the front axle, that stability that it needs to attack the curves as it always has. But this path has an obvious problem. It can compromise the current performance of the car and directly affect Charles Leclerc, who is already extracting maximum potential. That is, you can recover Hamilton, but lose global competitiveness. The second path is even harder. Maintain the current direction of development and force Hamilton to adapt. This, in theory, should be possible for a driver of his level, but Japan has shown that it is not that simple. And if you don't succeed, the risk is that the problem will not only continue, but will become chronic throughout the season. And this is where everything changes scale. Because if this scenario is consolidated, Ferrari will not only have a sporting problem, it will have a strategic problem. You will have invested in a project that does not revolve around its key piece, and that generates internal instability that can affect future decisions, technical development, and even the hierarchy within the team. Furthermore, there is a factor that cannot be ignored: the passage of time. Hamilton is not in an early phase of his career where he can afford 2 or 3 seasons of adaptation. Every year counts, every opportunity is critical, and every negative sign carries much greater weight than before. That's why Japan is not just a warning, it's a turning point. Because for the first time since his arrival, a real doubt appears that directly connects with what Rosberg said. What if this problem did not depend on the team? What if it was something that Hamilton carries with him and that Ferrari is now beginning to discover? The season is still long, yes. There is room for reaction too. But Formula One doesn't wait, and problems like this don't go away on their own. Ferrari right now is in a race against time, not only to develop its car but to get its driver back. And the big question that remains open, the one that defines this entire script and that will mark what comes next, is this: will Ferrari be able to restore Hamilton's trust before this problem becomes irreversible? Or are we witnessing the beginning of one of the biggest failed bets in modern Formula One? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.